Hi Year 12, this is a video looking at conversion experiences, so it's part of the unit on religious experience. So we've looked at a lot of theories of religious experience, and for these next two lessons we're going to look at a particular forms of experience. So we're going to look at conversion now, and then in the next lesson we're going to look at corporate experiences, in that lesson, which is experiences that happen to lots of people at one time. So conversion experiences are experiences where that change the person in some way. Most classically, it would be that they change their religion. So a person goes from not believing in God to believing in God, or perhaps from believing in one religion to believing in another religion. Most famous example probably is the conversion of St. Paul. St. Paul, who was his original name was Saul, and who was Jewish and a very, very keen follower of the Jewish religion. At first, he was his strong Jewish beliefs led him to be against Christianity, because there's a number of things in Christianity, particularly the idea of Jesus being God on earth and the Son of God and all that kind of stuff, that go against he went against his Jewish beliefs, and because of that, it led him to persecute Christianity. Even parts of the Bible suggest that Paul was present and, in fact, encouraged the death of some of the earlier followers of Jesus. And then, following that, Saul has this experience on the road. He's traveling to Damascus. On the road to Damascus, he loses his sight. Hears Jesus saying, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And subsequently his sight returns and he becomes a Christian. So he does a 180 from hating Christians to becoming a Christian. Now that's a classic example of a conversion experience, and it also sums up one of the reasons why religious believers often put a lot of emphasis on conversion experiences as the most believable forms of experience. The idea would be, why would someone who hated Christianity become a Christian unless they had an authentic experience of some kind? And more generally, the idea is, why would people make up conversion experiences? Because you could understand why a Christian would make up the idea of religious experience, because it was something they really wanted to believe in. It was also something they could, if they wanted to convert other people to their religion, saying they had a conversion experience might be a useful thing, because it could, saying they had a religious experience might be a useful thing because it could kind of help other people to join, to bring other people to the religion. But for someone who wasn't of that religion, why would they make up that they had seen a vision of Jesus, say, or whatever? It doesn't really make sense that they would want to make that up. So that's the kind of basic argument. We're going to explore in a little more detail, though, and with quite a sceptical eye in the first few things we're going to do. We're going to kind of look at why we might challenge the idea that conversion experiences are genuine. Let's begin. I would begin the lesson, if I was doing this in class, by asking this. Now, none of these are real. Well, some of these might be linked to real experiences, but I'm not thinking about these as real experiences. I'm just suggesting this idea. So think about this. Which of these experiences is the most convincing proof of the truth of Christianity, if they were real? Number one, a woman raised as an atheist in the USA sees a vision of Jesus. 2, a man raised by Christians in the UK who has been an atheist for 20 years sees a vision of Jesus. A Sikh man living in northern India sees a vision of Jesus. And 4, a committed Roman Catholic sees a vision of Jesus. Now, I think that Roman Catholic one would be the least convincing, because that person is already a Christian. So he has this prior belief. So, we could say that somehow those prior beliefs that he believes in Jesus, and Jesus being God and everything like that, might be the source of that experience. On the other hand, we could argue that the fact that he's Roman Catholic might be a reason for him to make up that vision in order to convert other people to his faith. The second least convincing, I would say, is number 2. A man raised by Christians in the UK who has been an atheist for 20 years sees a vision of Jesus. Well, this person was is an atheist, and so doesn't, it's a bit more convincing, because why would he make up this vision of Jesus? But on the other hand, we could say, well, he was raised by Christians, so he might have quite a lot of prior understanding of Christianity in his mind. It might be that kind of belief in God is part of, it's kind of fundamental to him, even though he's given up that belief. Somewhere deep down in his childhood, he still has that memories of believing in God and being a believer in Jesus. So to me, it would be more understandable how his mind could create that vision of Jesus. I would say number one was the next most convincing, or next least convincing, if we're going from least to most. A woman raised an atheist in the USA sees a vision of Jesus. Now, here, this woman was never a Christian, didn't have a Christian background, and raised as an atheist, and suddenly she sees a vision of Jesus. This seems a bit more convincing. Why would her mind create this image of Jesus? However, of course, America is a very Christian country. Even though she's raised as an atheist, she's going to know a lot about Christianity. She's going to have heard of Jesus. Lots of people around her will be believers in Jesus. So again, maybe that could be an explanation for why she's having this experience. That somehow that's put the ideas in her mind, and then her mind has created somehow this vision. I'd say the most convincing one would be this man. A Sikh man living in northern India sees a vision of Jesus. Now, my idea here would be, well, it would sound like a Sikh person living in India would have had slightly less exposure to Christianity than any of the other people. He's not in a Christian country. He was raised as a Sikh. Why would he see a vision of Jesus? Now, again, I think what would be most convincing is if we had a person who was raised as a Sikh or some other religion and they'd never heard of Christianity and they saw a vision of Jesus. Well, that would be very impressive in evidence, because how could they make it up that there was this guy Jesus and he was nailed to a cross and all that kind of stuff? However, the difficult thing is most of our conversion experiences are nothing like that. We don't have any examples of people who became Christians having never heard of Christianity before through a conversion experience. Linking on to that number three, well, that number three was based on a real experience. So have a look at the next slide. Yeah. That is it comes from the story of Sundar Singh, and I've created one of these two versions of Sundar Singh's life story. He's a real person. One of these is true, one of these is not true. I just want us to think about which, if they were true, which one would be more convincing if they were both true. So Sundar Singh was born into a Sikh family in the Punjab in northern India. This is the first version. He practiced the Sikh faith and was content with his beliefs for 40 years. He had never heard of Christianity or read the Bible. One day, while standing next to a train track, he saw a vision of Jesus. He immediately converted to Christianity despite the objections of his family. So, in that version of the story, he's never heard of the Bible or Christianity, and he had a vision of Jesus, and he converted. Okay, here's the second version. Sundar Singh was born to a Sikh family in the Punjab in northern India. He grew up during a time when the British were ruling India, and his mother sent him to a Christian school so that he could learn English. His mother died when he was 14, and this affected him terribly. He became particularly angry with the Christian missionaries in his area, that's the people who are out there trying to convert people. He would ridicule their faith and once burnt the Bible page by page. One day, depressed and feeling that life was meaningless, he went to a train track with the intention of ending his life. Suddenly he saw a vision of Jesus, who confirmed to him the truth of Christianity. Although his father had announced him for his decision and others in the Sikh community threatened his life, Sundar Singh immediately converted to Christianity. Now, in both versions of this story, it seems strange that he's had a religious experience. So both of these could be used as to say, well, this religious experience is credible, because in both versions of the story, he's not a Christian, he's a Sikh, and then suddenly has an experience of Christianity. In the version on the right-hand side of your screen, he's angry with Christianity. He dislikes Christianity. So sometimes when we discuss this in class, people say, well, that one would be more convincing because he hated Christianity and then he had the experience. Whereas on the left, he didn't hate Christianity. However, on the left, he didn't even know anything about Christianity. He'd never heard of Christianity, never read the Bible, and then he has an experience. So for me, the one on the left would be a more convincing experience because he had... He had knowledge. He had no knowledge of Christianity and never read the Bible, and then suddenly he saw Jesus. Where on the right, he already knew about Christianity. Now you can probably tell from these that the one on the right is the real version of the story. It's often held up by Christians as like a similar story to St. Paul, a guy who hates Christianity, has a conversion experience, and then becomes a Christian, and therefore it's an experience that we have to take seriously because he wouldn't want to make it up. However, as with the St. Paul one, I think there's some interesting things here. Sundar Singh wasn't a person who knew nothing about Christianity. In fact, he had a fairly emotional relationship with Christianity. He really disliked it. His mother sent him to a Christian school. After her death, she became really angry with Christianity. He far from being disinterested in Christianity, he kind of hated it. He burnt the Bible page by page. And then one day he has this sudden experience. Now, parallels with St. Paul's life are quite interesting. St. Paul hated Christians. He was responsible for the killing of Christians. Then he converts to Christianity. Now, the point that I'm trying to raise here is that from a skeptical point of view, people might say, well, what's interesting here is that these people who had an intensely emotional relationship with Christianity had these experiences. These weren't people who didn't care about Christianity. These were people who intensely disliked it. And so they had strong emotions for it. So perhaps that could be seen somehow psychologically as the cause of their experiences. Perhaps St. Paul felt a sense of guilt at what he'd done to Christians, and that was the kind of psychologically what caused his religious experience. Maybe Sundar Singh, it was that connection of Christianity to his mother who had died. He sent him to a Christian school. He linked Christianity to her, and so somehow that caused him to kind of have this obsession with Christianity, which eventually caused a vision of Jesus. So these are interesting points to say. Well, I don't think it's as simple as just saying these people went from hating Christianity to being Christians, therefore their experiences were real. I think it's more complicated than that. Here's another example, the example of Terry Virgo. You can watch the video, I'll put it in the description link. This is a kind of an example of an evangelical or charismatic Christian who had a religious experience. It's what they often in Christianity, in evangelical Christianity, call a born-again experience. He suddenly felt like blessed by Jesus. He felt like Jesus was there with him, a really strong experience of the Holy Spirit, and he saw it as a conversion. However, again, there's reasons to be skeptical of this as evidence for the existence of God. Because as you'll see when you watch the video, Terry Virgo wasn't someone who was an atheist and then had an experience, or someone who was a different religion. He was actually quite a committed Christian already. He was just a Christian who felt like he kind of felt like he wasn't taking his Christianity seriously enough. He didn't feel like he could throw himself into Christianity. I think he describes an experience of when he was in some place and he saw some people who were out on the streets trying to convert people to Christianity, and they were being mocked by the people on the street. They were kind of being laughed at, and he felt guilty because he felt his faith wasn't strong enough for him to go out there and defend them, or to be out there on the street trying to convert people himself. And then after he had his conversion experience, he felt his faith was strong enough. But the point is that he wanted to have that strong faith. He was already a Christian. He really wanted to be a completely committed Christian. And then he had the experience which made him a committed Christian. So he would see that as really strong evidence for God's existence. But from the outside, I don't think it's really great evidence, because it's his experience confirmed to him what he wanted to believe in the first place. So there's another example. Okay, what I'm going to do now, usually I'd give you a reading here at this point and we'd discuss, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the reading that's there on these slides. I'll put the slides up on the Microsoft Teams, and you can just annotate with anything you want to add to them. There's probably quite a few things to annotate on here, because I'm going to talk a little bit as we go through about how you might form things into arguments and into perils when you write an essay. We're not going to talk about essay writing directly in this video, but it will get us there. It will kind of get us, put the building blocks into place for when we talk about when we get to talking about essays in later videos. So just a little bit of background on conversion experiences. Here's the definition. So a conversion experience is one which leads to a change in the person who had the experience, leading them towards a different worldview or a more religious way of life. Conversion can be from one religion or no religion at all to another, or it can be from a lukewarm or nominal affiliation, that means you're kind of a Christian or whatever in name only, with a religion, to a deep commitment. Some conversions are dramatic and quick, others are slow and gradual. Scholars sometimes place conversions into three categories, although some experience can be placed in more than one category. So you have intellectual conversion. So here the believer changes their religious views. A previously held worldview becomes false and a new worldview becomes true. So that will be the case with St. Paul. He previously believed in Christianity, he previously believed in Judaism and it was against Christianity, then he believed in Christianity. Same with Sundar Singh. He previously believed in Sikhism, then he believed in Christianity. Second is moral conversion. Here there is a change in lifestyle rather than thought. The individual's life is turned around and they turn their back on their previously sinful behaviour. It doesn't necessarily have to be very sinful behaviour. It can just mean that the person has a new kind of moral impetus in life. That means a new zest or enthusiasm. That's the word. Enthusiasm for acting in a moral way. So, that Terry Virgo that we just looked at would be an example of that. His intellectual worldview hadn't changed because he was already a believing Christian in many ways, but it was more that the experience gave him more kind of enthusiasm for putting his beliefs into practice. Also, the sorts of conversion that William James looks at are largely this kind of things. They're generally with people who are already Christian, but they become more committed to a morally Christian way of life. Then you have social conversion. This kind of conversion involves accepting a new way of life or a way of worshipping. It also involves becoming part of a new community. So, although moral and social, it might be difficult to see the difference in. Moral is much more to do with you get a new level of commitment to being a moral person. Social conversion is like you change the way your way of life changes completely. You might become a priest or you might become a monk or nun. Or if you look at St. Paul, his was an intellectual conversion, but also a social conversion. He became a member of the Christian community. He would start worshipping in churches and so on and so on. So it changed completely. For many people, conversions involve all three. But I suppose the most important thing for us is that conversions can happen that do not involve an intellectual conversion. There are some conversions that do not involve changes in the kind of the way people think about the world. So that, in other words, you could be a Christian intellectually before you had a conversion experience and then stay a Christian, but just become more enthusiastic about your Christianity. Okay. Conversions often follow a similar pattern. This is not all the time, but the studies of conversion experiences do seem to suggest this is relatively common. So first, the individual is dissatisfied with his or her way of life or current system of beliefs. Secondly, they search for a new direction. Third, they reach a point of crisis resulting in an experience of God in a sense of sinfulness and repentance. They feel sorry for the bad things they've done. Fourth, this is followed by a feeling of joy and a loss of worry. So they feel repentant, but then when they have the experience, they feel great joy and they stop worrying so much. Lastly, in the longer term, they experience a new sense of purpose and direction in life. Now, this kind of, you can see the ideas here of William James in here, who talked about authentic religious experiences involving a change around from having this sick soul where you feel disillusioned with life, and then when you have the experience, you get a new enthusiasm, a zest for life, a moral sense of purpose, a lessened sense of self-importance, and so on and so on. Here are some famous examples of conversions. St. Paul's experience of Jesus on the road to Damascus. We've talked about St. Augustine's conversion. Yes, so St. Augustine was not a Christian, and he had a conversion when he was sitting in his garden, and he said that he heard a child's voice saying, take it and read, which he took to be a message from God telling him to read the Bible. And he read the Bible and he converted. It's an interesting example because, people have speculated, did he really hear the voice of a child? Did he just overhear someone's conversation? And even if it came from God, take it and read. It's a bit of a leap from hearing that voice and thinking that's directly about the Bible. But there we go. Nicky Cruz, who was a leader of a violent New York gang before undergoing a conversion experience and becoming a Christian. It's interesting to look at his life. There's loads of stuff on the internet about him if you want to investigate who he was, Nicky Cruz. But he's a very, very famous example of someone who underwent a strong moral turnaround. He was involved in violence and crime and then became a Christian. Okay, we're going to start looking at arguments for and against accepting the genuineness of religious experiences. We're going to begin by looking at William James. This covers some stuff you've seen before. Here's a quote from James. He talks about the experiences he studied. Clearly, these are genuine experiences, as you will observe from the effects. If lives are changed dramatically for the better, then the claim that something supernatural is at work has to be taken seriously. It is interesting that converts describe conversion as being a passive experience, something that acts upon them. So William James is saying, and we've seen this before, this is his pragmatism, that we have to take conversion experiences seriously because they involve people's lives being changed dramatically for the better. So let's talk about James in detail. Sorry there's so much text on here, but it's just so it's exactly the same as the slides you can print out. So one argument in favour of miracles, I've no idea why it says miracles there, I apologise, it should say conversion experiences. It comes from William James. As a pragmatist, James argued the best way to test the authenticity of an experience is to look at its results. If the experience transforms the person, making them more moral, patient and contented, it is authentic. From this point of view, conversion experiences are the most, or perhaps the only authentic religious experiences. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because James would basically argue that if an experience does not involve any kind of conversion, so if an experience does not make you a better person, then it cannot be considered genuine, which is an interesting idea. However, I would say there are significant problems with James's view. The fact that an experience has changed someone's life can perhaps be taken as proof that the person is not lying about what they have experienced. So I think James is quite convincing in suggesting that people aren't telling lies, because why would they lie if the experience has changed them? It doesn't, why would you really be changed by an experience that didn't happen? It seems likely something happened. After all, someone is unlikely to change their life completely unless they think the experience is genuine. However, this does not guarantee that conversion experiences come from God. Perhaps people who experience conversions think they have experienced God, when in reality their experience can be explained psychologically or physiologically. So physiologically, that means there's some physical explanation. So that's to do with things like temporal lobe epilepsy. Perhaps the person experienced some stimulation of the temporal lobes of the brain. They thought they had a religious experience, but in reality they did not. Psychologically, we're looking at the ideas of people like Freud and someone called Starbuck, we're going to look at in a moment. So this is the kind of back and forth I'd do in a peril. I'd look at William James. You might, it all depends. We'll look more at it in the essay. You can either do William James, and then as your response, you can look at these psychological theories I'm going to look at now. Or it might be better to just do what we've done so far as the response, to say, here's what William James says. The response is simply in line with what someone like Bertrand Russell said, if you remember from the William James lessons. Bertrand Russell said, just because something affects someone in a significant way, it doesn't mean it's authentic. It doesn't mean it comes from God. And then what you can do is, if you put that as your response, you can then follow up with your next peril and start looking at, well, perhaps it's got a psychological explanation, or perhaps it's got a physiological explanation. So let's look at the next idea. So here's a quote from Freud. As with all religious experiences, these events are hallucinations, conversion experiences he's talking about. They're the product of childhood insecurities. He's talking about the Oedipus complex. Just like our dreams, these hallucinations are produced by our subconscious, the part of our mind that we can't understand. Hence, they are false. So this is Freud's theory, which we looked at already, about how religious experiences are produced. And here he's saying, conversion experiences are exactly the same. So Freudian conversion. Freud thought that religion is born from humanity's need to make his helplessness tolerable. We've looked at all this before, but I'm going to kind of link it to conversion. Thus, when confronted by the hostile elemental forces of nature, we anthropomorphize them into a fearful yet benevolent God. Anthropomorphize means we turn them into a person or gods and strive to have a relationship with them. In the face of a feeling of helplessness when surrounded by an unfriendly and frightening world, we resort to strategies that have worked before. Such a stratagem is submission to a male authority figure. So there's a bit of background here that I'm not including because it was all in the stuff on Freud in our last lesson. But what it's basically saying here is, in our childhood, we have these fears and these desires that we find troubling, and to overcome them, we submit to the authority of the father, and the father is kind of the guarantor that everything will be okay. In our adulthood, hostile forces of nature, death, disease, all the things that we can't control, scare us. And what we do is, using that same pattern of thinking or that same emotional reaction, we look for a male authority figure who we can follow his rules, and if we follow his rules, everything's going to be okay, and that's God. Now, here's the next paragraph. Freud would understand the impulse for religious conversion in such a way. Conversion, particularly within evangelical Christian groups, is a way of resolving inner conflict and neurosis by submitting to the rules, precepts, and rituals required by a God who demands that you must be born again. A conversion experience, Freud would contend, consists of the universal neurosis that's temporarily slipped into a hallucinatory psychosis. So, in other words, what's it saying here? Well, in Christianity, and certainly in certain forms of Christianity, there's this strong emphasis that part of your obedience to God means you must have some kind of born-again experience to really have that guarantee of being saved by God. Many evangelical or charismatic Christians would say you're only guaranteed to be saved if you have some kind of born-again experience, an experience that confirms to you the reality of God and confirms that you have been saved. You feel that God is there and He's saved you from your sins and you'll get to heaven and all that kind of stuff. So that would mean, in that kind of context, a conversion experience would be needed. If that's the way your religion thinks about things, then you really need to have that conversion experience in order to confirm the existence of God, and therefore to feel the safety that Freud says God is bringing. So for Freud, that means that the pressure within certain forms of Christianity to feel to confirm the existence of God with an experience is what gives you that pressure on your mind to create this hallucinatory psychosis. So you desperately want to have this experience, and so you have the experience, and that's where conversion comes from for Freud. Now, Freud you could use on his own, but there's someone else who looks at psychology, not in a Freudian way, but you could perhaps link the two together, and that's the next person we're going to look at. This is Edwin Starbuck. He says this: there are interesting parallels between conversion and normal adolescent development. These stages of anxiety and finding a new identity are common to all young adults. That's why many conversions happen between the ages of 15 and 24. So Starbuck is basically saying that most conversions apparently happen when people are fairly young, between 15 and 24. That's the most common time for people to convert. And Starbuck is saying that actually that age, when you're growing up and finding your adult identity, is a time of great anxiety, and is a time where people generally go through a series of kind of mini crises and then resolve those problems. And his idea is that actually, if we look at it, religious conversion is just one example of a universal process. Every young person goes through some kind of experience that changes them. Religious experience is just having a religious experience or a conversion experience is just one example of that. And therefore, his idea is it's not from God, it's just from the human mind. We have a tendency to have some kind of experience, whether it's religious or otherwise, during that age in our life. So let's look in more detail. He's called Edwin Starbuck. He's not called Edwin Starr. He's the singer who did the song War, What Is It Good For? Absolutely Nothing. Who lived in Beeston in Nottingham, which is like the best place in the world. Anyway, He's Edwin Starbuck, like the coffee chain. So an argument against believing in that convergent experiences are proof of the existence of God comes from Edwin Starbuck, 1866 to 1947. He found that most convergent experiences happen to people between the ages of 15 and 24. Starbuck went on to note that at this time of life, many people experience a crisis of identity which mirrors the stages of religious conversion. The individual experiences anxiety and depression before finding peace and a stronger sense of identity. To Starbuck, these similarities suggest that convergent experiences can be explained purely psychologically and are not evidence for the existence of God. So, the way I usually explain this is if you think about when people are growing up from 15 to 24, that it can be the most dramatic change in that person's life. It happens in that time. Sometimes people go, this would have been before, it wouldn't have existed in Starbucks' time. But, one thing that people often do in that age is identify with various subcultures. So, someone could, who was just like everyone else at school, could come into school age 17 and suddenly they're like, dye their hair black, they're wearing a nose piercing, and they're into they're a goth, or they're into metal or something like that. That's the kind of stereotypical thing that can happen as teenagers. It also can happen the other way around. People change their image, their style, their friendship groups, their self-understanding of who they are is kind of formed at that time of life, is the idea. And that reflects the fact that people are trying to come to terms with who they are as they move from from childhood, identifying with the family, to adulthood, and staking their own place in the world. Now, what Starbuck is trying to say is that is a universal thing. Everybody, whether it happens dramatically or not, everybody kind of carves out this new identity during that stage in their life, 15 to 24. His point is that when people have a convergent experience during that stage in their life, that is just a particular way of someone doing what everybody's doing. Everybody is carving out some kind of identity. Everyone's got this kind of psychological pressures on them to work out who they are, to kind of work out how they fit into the adult world. And having a convergent experience is just one way for people to psychologically deal with that, because it kind of gives you an identity. And an identity as a Christian, this is who you are, this is where you get your sense of right and wrong, this is your community that you belong to as a Christian community, is quite a strong way for people to resolve those problems of identity. So how could you use Freud and Starbuck together? Well, what you could argue is if you used Freud's ideas about, why Freud kind of explains why it's desirable for people to believe in God. What Starbuck can do is help to explain why wanting to believe in God can manifest as a convergent experience at a particular time in someone's lives. Because his idea would be anxiety and things like that are particularly strong at age 15 to 24, when not only are they these great natural forces you're trying to come to terms with, death and all those kind of things, but there's also the anxiety surrounding finding a place in the world, finding your identity. And so perhaps you could use Freud and Starbuck to say, well, yeah, both of these together kind of reinforce the idea that there's stuff going on in your mind subconsciously that is leading people to have these religious experiences. I hope that makes sense. Of course, all these stuff can be criticised, particularly Freud, because he really had no evidence to back it up. And you might say with Starbuck, well, he hasn't really explained why certain people would have a religious experience and others wouldn't. What is it about? That would be my criticism of Starbuck. What is it about? How can you explain it? Everyone goes through a crisis of identity and resolves that crisis of identity, but why do some people do it in a religious way? Why does it cause someone to have a religious experience? He doesn't really explain that. Okay, so that's one set of things. I'm going to look at. We looked at William James. I'm going to look at another, perhaps a more basic reason to believe in religious convergent experiences, but probably not a very good reason. And and I'll look at how it can be criticised. So it begins by looking at some criticisms of religious experiences, but I'm doing that to kind of get a sense of why convergent experiences might be the most believable kind. So Some interpretations of religious experiences suggest that what makes them religious is the way they are interpreted by the person that experiences them. For example, from an atheist position, Anthony Flew, who's quite a famous philosopher, argues that religious people will be influenced by the beliefs they were brought up with and will therefore interpret everyday experiences in a religious way. Here's a quote from him, from Anthony Flew. Religious experiences are interpreted in terms of our background and upbringing. Hence, people in Britain tend to become Christians, but this is due to their background rather than anything supernatural. So his idea is, people have certain experiences in their life. They might you might have a profound and peaceful experience while observing nature. This is just an example I'm giving. You might be out in the natural world looking at the trees and mountains and everything like that, and you might feel a profound sense of peace and beauty and all those kind of things. Now, Anthony Flu's point is that for some people that could result in a conversion experience to Christianity, but that is because those people have this background in Christianity. They've been brought up in a Christian country, and so when they have a profound experience like that, their immediate reaction is to think it comes from God, whereas actually it's nothing to do with God, it's just an experience, and an atheist would experience it in a different way, and a Muslim in a different way, and so on and so on. So that's a criticism of religious experiences. However, if someone's experience turns them from a non-believer into a believer, or from a believer in one religion to a believer in another, surely we cannot say that their experience is due to their previous worldview. If an atheist becomes a Christian because of a religious experience, it would seem wrong to say that experience was caused by their previous beliefs. So I'm using Flew to set up what I think is one of the stronger, on the face of it, quite a strong argument for conversion experiences. It's kind of saying, okay, we might be able to explain every other experience in that way, in the way that Flew says. It might be true that loads of experiences can be explained by the fact that these people were raised as Christian, they had some kind of experience, and they interpreted it in a Christian way. They had some kind of experience of the beauty of nature, and they thought, oh, that's God. However, with conversion experiences, it's not as easy as that, because we can't say, it's not possible to say if someone was a Sikh and became a Christian, we can't just say, oh, they're just interpreting their views due to their background beliefs, because their background beliefs were Sikh, and now they become a Christian. If someone's an atheist and became a Christian based on a religious experience, we can't just say, well, that person's experience was just due to their background beliefs, because before they were an atheist. Surely if they'd gone out into nature and seen the beauty of nature, if their experience was just caused by their background beliefs, then they would have just said, wow, isn't it amazing the way that evolution and plate tectonics and stuff have created this beautiful world for us? Isn't it amazing that all this has come from the Big Bang? That would be their experience. But no, some people have experiences which lead them to move from one kind of religion to another. And that seems to be what makes religious experiences impressive. However, this is the criticism, and this links back to what we looked at the beginning. So this argument may have power in cases in which an individual converts to a religion they have never had an awareness of before. So yeah, if I'm a Hindu, and I've never heard of Christianity, and suddenly I see a vision of Jesus and he says, I'm the Son of God and I was killed on the cross, and etc., then that would be very convincing. However, more often conversions seem to be a more active participation in a religion in which one was raised. This is the case for many of the experiences discussed by William James. So in William James's cases, that idea, the person converted to a new religion, so it must be real, it must have come from God, is not so convincing, because those people are actually already Christians. Even in cases when individuals convert to religions they were opposed to in the past, such as in the cases of St. Paul and Sundar Singh, they have usually had a high level of exposure to that religion prior to their experience. So we've seen that St. Paul was actually very involved in Christianity as a persecutor. He knew loads about it. He was intensely emotionally caught up with that religion, and then he converted. Same with Sundar Singh. He was not someone who was indifferent to Christianity. He was very concerned with Christianity. He actually hated it, and then he converted. So this evidence makes it easier to argue that conversion experiences are in some way caused by a prior religious understanding. So in other words, Flu's arguments seem to still have some power, because if you look at the cases of St. Paul and Sundar Singh, it might be that their previous understandings of Christianity are what caused them to experience that in a particular way. I'm just kind of going out on a limb here, but perhaps St. Paul, a critic could say that perhaps St. Paul didn't hear Jesus' voice. He didn't have this miraculous thing where his sight returned. Perhaps what really happened was St. Paul experienced a moment of great serenity and peace, and in that moment, his prior knowledge of Christianity and his guilt at having oppressed Christians, perhaps that built up within him somehow, and he interpreted that experience as a Christian conversion experience. His mind kind of led him in that direction. So that would lead us to say, well, perhaps conversion experiences aren't that convincing as evidence. Perhaps they are quite easy to dismiss in the way that flu dismisses religious experiences in general. I hope that makes sense. So that is, I think, everything on conversion experiences for now. Make sure you've printed off this stuff and annotate, because I've said quite a lot, I think, to go along with this stuff. If there's anything you're not sure about, please get in touch. But I will be doing something where we, specific essay guidance on conversion experiences later.